Let's get some insight now from Senior Presidential Advisor Jared Kushner. Jared, thanks for the time. Want to talk about this big peace deal between Israel and the UAE. We heard the president talking about it. Wonder if you could kind of lift the veil about how we as a country got here.
Sure. Well, thank you, Brett. It's great to be with you today. And, you know, being in Washington, there are a lot of days where you see a lot of process, you see a lot of posturing, but it's very rare that you have a day where you can truly celebrate a historic achievement that will really change the course of a region and the world. This is something the president really started on his first foreign trip. We went to Saudi Arabia in May of 2017. I believe you were there, actually.
Yep.
And at that speech, the president laid out a new vision for the region. Since then, President Trump has taken back the territorial caliphate of ISIS. He's killed several of the terrorist leaders. He's brought all the people in the region together, and he's worked very closely with Israel and with other Arab countries to align them around shared interests and also to make sure that they can together combat common threats. So this was a very intense set of diplomacy. It's taken 3.5 years, but President Trump now has really set the stage in the Middle East to accomplish this historic breakthrough, but many, many more great things that I believe can happen in the months and years ahead.
Yeah, he suggested that there may be other countries coming on board. Are there?
We have a lot of interest from a lot of countries. You know, people are often afraid to go first. I think a lot of countries are watching to see how this plays out. So far, it's been very positively received in the country. And a lot of these people, they don't want to focus on past conflicts. They want to focus on how they can have a better future. They want their children to lead better lives than them. They want security. They want economic prosperity. And if you look at the United Arab Emirates and you look at Israel, they're both technology powerhouses, financial powerhouses, and most importantly, security powerhouses. So this really is a great alignment. And again, President Trump built trust after the last administration. Both parties had felt down on their relationship with America. They felt very, very betrayed after the Iran deal, which sent $150 billion to Iran, and they used that money to fund a lot of the proxies that were destabilizing the region. But President Trump has rebuilt that trust. He's brought them closer together, and he's aligned them around a common vision that can be good. And I will say this too, you know, somebody said to me very early on when I got this assignment, they said, you don't lose money betting against success in the Middle East. But I also say you can lose a lot of money betting against Trump. And President Trump took on this challenge. He wasn't afraid to fail. He tried doing it in an unconventional way. And by doing it, he's achieved a truly historic result.
Well, I want to ask you another question about this. And first, I want to let you listen to Prime Minister Netanyahu and his comments late this afternoon.
Sure.
This is the greatest advancements toward peace between Israel and the Arab world in the last 26 years. This is a future of peace, a future of security, and a future of prosperity.
When did the Prime Minister finally agree to hold off on annexation? And do you have a sense of how long this pause is going to be?
So we've been speaking about what annexation would look like for the last 6 months. You know, the Prime Minister really is a historic leader. He's a visionary. He was able to agree to a two-state solution with the Palestinians on the basis of President Trump's vision for peace, and to have the first time we ever had a map forward. So we were talking about how we could implement this plan, because by implementing the plan, we'd actually be saving the two-state solution, not destroying it, which would be a massive change. So we've been talking about it for a bunch of months, and then obviously over the last 6 weeks, the notion of a normalization in lieu of applying Israeli sovereignty came up, and Prime Minister Netanyahu did the calculus and saw that this was much more in the interests of Israel in the short, medium, and long term. And that's what great leaders do. They put the politics aside and they make the right decisions that strengthen their countries and keep their people safe.
All right, I want to turn to the election. You're deeply involved. You were last time. You are this time. You just heard our new Fox News poll with former Vice President Biden leading by 7 points in that poll. But in the job performance, the president is at 44%, disapprove 54%. And in who is trusted to do a better job on different issues, the president is up 3 on the economy, but he is losing to Vice President Biden on a number of key issues. Where do you see this race right now?
So we've spoken about the methodology of the Fox polls, and we saw in the last election, out of 120 polls conducted in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania between Labor Day and the election, out of 120, only one showed President Trump ahead. So these polls are based off of flawed methodology. Our polls basically show that the president is leading in a lot of the states that he won last time. And we were just in Ohio, and our team, we won. The president won Ohio by 8.5 points. He believes he's going to win by more this time. And if you go state by state and you look at real voter turnout models, you look at the enthusiasm, we're seeing very, very encouraging signs on the ground. And we think the people of this country love what President Trump's doing, and they want to see him back in office for 4 more years so that he can continue to rebuild the economy and finish the job that he started.
Yeah, just to be clear, when you say flawed, you'd like to see likely voters, not registered voters. You'd like to see the sample that matches how you see the election shaping up. But if you look at the Real Clear Politics average, Joe Biden is up 7.5 points. It's an average of recent polls across the board. And the average of battlegrounds, you can see Biden with the lead. I get that you don't like polls at this point, and you like them to be
Brett,
likely.
No, but Brett, what I would just say is, look, on Election Day last year, everyone thought it was going to be a landslide. I was looking at our data, and our data showed that Trump was going to win the landslide. A lot of those polls are using a 24% Republican turnout model, but in 2018 and 2016, it was 33%. So I don't know why the companies are spending money on these polls, because it's not scientific and it's not indicative of what's actually going to happen. But that's another story.
Yeah, well, we can talk about poll methodology, and as we get closer, we'll get a different mindset as we look at those. I want to ask you, the president addressed these questions about the post office and about funding the post office. Spent a lot of time in that briefing. The critics are saying that after his interview with Maria Bartiromo today, that he's essentially brazenly attempting to, what they say is, steal the election by invalidating vote by mail ballots, or that he's deliberately damaging the post office to somehow change the election. Address that from that charge that the critics are giving.
Yeah, one of the President Trump's many skills is that he gets his critics to go crazy on all types of things and end up making his point. All President Trump's been trying to say is that there are some states that have been doing mail-in ballots in different forms, whether it's absentee ballot, and they do it appropriately. If you're trying to rush a whole system, all the recent examples are showing that it just doesn't work. It's not seamless. It's like saying we're trusting the post office to be the most efficient arbiter of our democracy. I don't think anyone thinks that that's the case. So President Trump is trying to bring attention to an issue, and it is a big issue. We saw that in New York. We've seen that in various states, and President Trump just wants a fair and well-run election, and he's working hard to make sure that that happens.
All right, another thing that's setting off the critics is you and Ivanka meeting with Kanye West in Colorado. You said you've been friends, however, he is running for president. There are charges that that this is a coordinated plan to somehow siphon black votes away from Joe Biden. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, look, unlike others, I'm able to keep friendships across the aisle, and Kanye's been a friend for 10 years. He's a very, very special person. He's a very successful music artist. He's a very successful designer. He's been very successful at a lot of the things he's done. We were together in the same spot. Kanye sent me a book about a month ago called Powernomics by Dr. Claude Anderson. I read the book. It was absolutely phenomenal. It actually incorporated a lot of the things that President Trump has been doing, and it's something I've distributed more copies to my domestic policy team, because I think there's a lot of inspiration we can get from it for President Trump's second-term agenda. So we were more talking about ideas, and again, friendships should trump politics,
but
and that's what's most important.
Do you know that are the charges that Republican operatives are trying to help him get on these ballots, is that true? Do you know that?
Again, we did not discuss his campaign and what he's up to. I read things in the press, but I have not discussed that directly with him.
Okay, and you don't know that that's happening?
Look, like I've said, I've learned in 5 years of doing this now that just because something's said in the media doesn't mean it's true. So I like to investigate the facts, look at the real data, and unless I feel like something's verified, I tend not to assume that it's gospel.
All right, 2 more things really quickly. Who's really in charge of the campaign? There's some who think that you are still the de facto campaign manager.
President Trump has always been in charge of the campaign, and he always will be in charge of the campaign. And my job is to help him make sure that he has good options for people, good people around him, and people who can execute. And right now we have over 1,500 people in the field. We've got over 1.5 million volunteers. We've got a tremendous organization. The online fundraising has been tremendous. And so President Trump has a very, very strong operation, but that's because of his leadership and his vision. He sets the message, he sets the tone, he decides where he wants to go, and he's got a lot of people like myself who help him execute that.
You know, very last thing, you said he likes to stir up his critics. At that press briefing, he seemed to give credence to a Newsweek op-ed that questioned the eligibility of Kamala Harris being able to run for vice president. Why do that?
I'll be honest, Brett, I've been out here waiting to do your show, so I haven't seen that. I haven't seen the op-ed, so I'll reserve judgment on that till I know more about it.
Okay. She was born in Oakland, California, to Indian and Jamaican immigrants on California soil. She's a natural-born citizen. Anyway, if you see this election, are you losing right now, or do you see that you have to make up ground before November 3rd? How do you see it playing out over 82 days?
Right. So I think that President Trump is in a much better position now in this campaign than he was going into the last campaign. Again, he's been an underdog all of his life, but he always comes through. Take today's peace deal, for instance. Nobody thought that we'd be able to do anything like this. And again, it shows that President Trump's style is that he does things in untraditional ways. He makes people uncomfortable. He takes different approaches. Maybe he uses people who people wouldn't think would be the normal people to do it. But at the end of the day, he gets results, and that's what really matters. And the American people, they like results, and they want results from their leaders. And I think they're tired of politicians who talk and talk and talk. What President Trump has brought to Washington is accountability. He's brought action. He's very transparent. Think about it. With President Trump on any issue, you don't have to wonder what his policy is on anything. You don't have to worry what he's thinking. Just look at Twitter, look at his press conferences. He's the most accessible president. And so people really know what they're going to get with President Trump. And I do think that America's with his policies, and they want to see him be the person that's going to rebuild the country after the coronavirus and keep doing the great policies that he's been doing. But again, today's historic agreement between Israel and UAE would not have been possible without President Trump's leadership, the trust that he's built with our allies, and the Middle East is a much safer place than when President Trump came into office 4 years ago.
Well, there's no doubt there's a big foreign policy win. We started with that. Thanks for taking all of our questions and for the time.
Great to be with you, Bret.
Jared Kushner.